I found it the day we buried my husband. A walnut box no bigger than a hardcover novel, tucked inside the false bottom of his workbench drawer, a secret cavity he had shown me once years earlier when he tapped the wood and said, "If anything ever goes sideways, remember the false bottom." My stepdaughter Chloe called it junk and dropped it into a black garbage bag while she was clearing the house to flip it. I pulled it out after she left, opened the tiny brass lock with a key I knew he kept magneted under the drafting table, and unfolded a single sheet of yellow legal paper. Frank's architect's block lettering read, *, do not trust them. Save yourself. *, I didn't understand the full weight of that warning until Chloe drained every cent of my $115,000 widow's inheritance into a cryptocurrency wallet and vanished into the digital ether. Today she spends her days in my yarn shop, Purl of Perjury, hand-winding skeins in a canvas apron that says * tangled in crypto lies *, while every single label we print displays the federal fraud docket number that erased her future. This is the story of how a quiet 58-year-old widow with an old locksmith's skill and a forensic accountant's eye forced a digital thief to thread her own noose. My name is Margaret, and before Frank I was already a widow. My first husband Ben left me that inheritance, $115,000 from a life insurance policy he had stubbornly maintained even when we were scraping by in our 20s, waiting tables and fixing cars, convinced that someday we'd need a cushion. For years I kept every penny in a plain savings account, afraid to touch it because it felt like blood money. Losing Ben had taught me that security was a fragile thing, so I hoarded that small fortune like a squirrel with a winter nut. Then Frank came along at a potluck supper 12 years ago. He was a retired architect, 12 years older than me, gentle and precise, the kind of man who carried a carpenter's pencil behind his ear, and could spend an entire afternoon sharpening it to an exact chisel point before sketching a single line. He wore flannel shirts that smelled of cedar sawdust, and had a quiet way of making you feel like you were the most important blueprint he'd ever drawn. He had a grown daughter, Chloe, from his first marriage. She was 36 when I met her, all sharp elbows and expensive perfume, always pitching her next business venture with the zeal of a televangelist, but none of the follow-through. Frank adored her despite her flaws, the way parents do when they've spent decades hoping a difficult child will finally turn a corner. That hope would become the soft seam that unraveled everything. When I told Frank I dreamed of opening a high-end yarn dyeing studio, he didn't just pat my hand and smile. He lit up like a man handed a new set of plans. I had spent 40 years as a bookkeeper for a mid-sized manufacturing firm in Ohio, tracking inventory and reconciling ledgers until my eyes crossed, but my real passion had always been fiber. I spun my first skein on a borrowed wheel at 22, and I'd been dyeing in my kitchen sink ever since, experimenting with marigold petals and walnut husks and madder root. Frank understood obsession. He rebuilt the old barn on our property into a climate-controlled workspace with stainless steel dye vats heated by programmable induction burners, a dedicated skein winding station with a heavy-duty swift and ball winder bolted to a butcher block counter, and a drying room with humidity monitors that could hold a constant 55% relative humidity so the merino didn't felt. He installed an eye wash station and a floor drain for acid spills, and he labeled every pipe and valve. I spent weeks geeking out over acid dyes, indigo fermentation, and the exact pH levels that yield the richest cochineal reds. I learned to calculate dye percentages to 2 decimal places and to log the specific gravity of every stock solution. Chloe smelled opportunity the moment she saw the steel vats. She had a marketing degree from a state school and a relentless Instagram presence filled with flat lays of avocado toast and inspirational quotes about the hustle. She convinced me to take her on as a partner, arguing that I was the artisan and she was the conduit to customers. She would handle branding, sales, social media, and trade shows. I would do the dyeing, production, and bookkeeping. I put my entire inheritance into the venture, thinking of it as building a legacy with what Ben had left me, a way to weave his memory into something colorful and alive. Frank used his own savings to fund the barn conversion and the initial equipment, a sum he never disclosed, but that I later learned was nearly $60,000. We called the studio Thread and Truth. For 18 months it hummed along, our hand-dyed merino, yak and silk blends selling to indie dyers and pricey boutiques across the country. I handled the ledger, and I was meticulous. Every invoice, every dye lot cost, every penny of sales tax sat in neat columns in my QuickBooks file, backed up to an external drive every night. But the business bank account was a joint partnership account, and Chloe had equal signatory authority. That was Frank's gently urged compromise to keep peace, because Chloe had accused me of trying to box her out before we even opened the doors. I agreed because I trusted family. Then Frank's heart gave out on a Thursday morning in April. He was 73, and he had ignored his cardiologist's warnings about stress and cholesterol for years, waving them off with a joke about old houses and creaky pipes. I found him slumped in his workshop chair, a half-finished wooden Swift still clamped to his bench, the maple arms unstrung. His reading glasses had fallen onto the plans for a new deck he was designing for a neighbor. The paramedics said it was a massive event, instant, nothing to be done. I called Chloe from the hospital hallway, my voice a raw thread, some broken thing I barely recognized as my own. She arrived 4 hours later with her husband Tyler, a man whose entire personality consisted of overpriced sneakers, a leased sports car he couldn't afford, and LinkedIn posts about the mindset of winners. Tyler immediately started talking about estate logistics and time-sensitive asset preservation, while I was still holding Frank's wedding ring in my palm, the metal still warm from my fist. I remember the way Chloe's eyes swept the room, cataloguing furniture and artwork, pausing on the antique drafting table Frank had restored himself. Grief hadn't even settled into my bones yet, and they were already inventorying my life. The day of the discovery happened the morning after the funeral, a grey drizzle that matched the ache in my chest. Chloe and Tyler had taken over the living room with laptops and manila folders, assembling what they called a transition plan. They spoke in the low, urgent tones of people closing a deal. Chloe buzzed through the house with black contractor-grade trash bags, purging Frank's things with a speed that felt violent. She moved through his workshop like a tornado, tossing half-empty wood-finish cans, old blueprints rolled and rubber-banded, a coffee mug full of sharpened pencils, and then the little walnut box. I saw her pull it from the drawer, shake it, hear nothing inside, and drop it into the bag with a dismissive "more junk." Something in my chest cinched tight, a visceral lurch. Frank had shown me that box once years ago when he was organizing his bench after a project. He tapped it with a calloused finger and said, "If anything ever goes sideways, Margaret, remember the false bottom." I hadn't thought about it since, had half forgotten it existed, but now that throwaway line rang in my skull like a fire alarm. I waited until Chloe went to the kitchen to scold Tyler about a cold brew shortage, her voice carrying that particular whine of someone who believes the world should cater to her. I retrieved the box from the bag and slipped it into my oversized cardigan pocket. It had a tiny brass lock, a miniature mechanism of the sort Frank loved, just 3 tumblers. I knew where Frank hid the key, a magnetic strip under the drawer slide of his drafting table, in the exact spot he'd shown me, the way a man who builds hidden compartments plans for someone to find them. The key was still there, cold against my fingertip. I opened the box and found the note folded into a tight triangle, the ink still sharp, the block letters absolutely certain. Asterisk, do not trust them. Save yourself. Asterisk, I read it 3 times, my mouth going dry. My hands were shaking so hard the box rattled against my knuckles. I slipped the note back inside, relocked the box, and tucked it into the lining of my purse. I said nothing yet. I just let the seed of suspicion begin to germinate. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that family isn't defined by blood, but by who would never bleed you dry. Now back to the reckoning. Chloe re-entered the workshop 10 minutes later with a document that smelled faintly of toner and urgency. She had her concerned daughter face on, the one she used for bank tellers and boutique owners trying to restock our yarn, all soft eyes and tilted head. "Margaret, I've been reviewing the business structure, and given everything, it makes sense for me to take over managing the partnership. You're grieving. I don't want you to worry about anything. You can just sign this limited power of attorney, and I'll handle all the financials and vendor payments so you can rest." She pushed a form toward me on the dusty workbench, a multi-page document printed on legal paper with a little red "Sign Here" flag. I glanced at it, not with my usual careful scrutiny, but with the foggy guise of a shattered widow. It wasn't a limited power of attorney. The first paragraph alone described a full partnership interest transfer, quietly worded, that would sign my entire ownership stake and all access to the business account over to her as managing partner, effective immediately and irrevocably. It included a clause indemnifying her for any future claims. I wasn't a lawyer, but I'd spent decades reading fine print, and my internal alarm went off so loudly I could barely hear her voice. Tyler hovered in the doorway, scrolling his phone but watching me like a hawk, his thumb pausing every few seconds. I suddenly felt cold, the kind of cold that goes deeper than skin. I let my eyes go a little unfocused and said, "Oh dear, Chloe, I'm just so scrambled right now. Can I look at it tomorrow? I can't even find my reading glasses." I patted my pockets, looked around vaguely. She pursed her lips but nodded, patting my arm as if I were a slow child. "Of course, sweetie. Why don't you come stay with us for a while? We have the guest suite. You shouldn't be alone in this big house with all these memories." I recognized the move for what it was. Isolate me, control my environment, get me to sign. I played the confused widow and agreed. I packed a small bag with enough clothes for a week and buried the walnut barks at the bottom, wrapped in a worn cashmere scarf Ben had given me decades ago. Within 48 hours, I was installed in a beige guest room in Chloe and Tyler's 4-bedroom suburban house 30 miles from my barn studio, a house that smelled faintly of plug-in air fresheners and ambition. They took my car keys for safekeeping, claiming I shouldn't drive in my fragile state. They monitored my phone calls, always suddenly in the room when I dialed, offering me cups of tea or asking if I needed an extra blanket. The landline had no long distance unless Tyler was in the den with the door open. I smiled vaguely and scattered little breadcrumbs of forgetfulness, leaving a half-empty tea mug in 3 different rooms, misplacing my sweater, asking the same question twice. I told them I wasn't sleeping well, which was true, but the fog they saw was a performance. I had spent 40 years reconciling ledgers, untangling discrepancies, and noticing when a decimal point was one place too far. Grief had not dulled my mind, it had sharpened it, focusing everything to a fine point. While Chloe and Tyler relaxed, assuming I was unraveling, I began cataloging. The investigation began in tiny fragments, like a fiber artist picking apart a tangled skein. Chloe spent hours in her home office with the door closed, but the walls were thin. During my set times when I was supposed to be napping, I sat in the guest room with my ear near the shared wall. I heard frantic calls at odd hours. One afternoon she was on the phone with someone and I could make out, "What do you mean the margin ratio changed? I wired exactly what you said." Her voice had a panicked edge, the kind a gambler uses when a bet goes sideways. Later that night I heard a quieter, harder tone. "No, I don't have a liquidity buffer right now. You have to trust me. I'm about to secure the whole thing." She kept saying secure like a mantra. Tyler's spending accelerated in full view. A brand new BMW X7 appeared in the driveway one week, followed a few days later by a Bayliner boat parked on a trailer in the side yard, still with the manufacturer's plastic on the seats. Tyler posted about the boat on LinkedIn with the caption, "Success is a series of small bets that pay off big," which made me want to scream. I started keeping a log in a small spiral notepad I kept inside the lining of my purse, using a tiny golf pencil I'd found in a kitchen drawer. I noted every oddity, the times Chloe paced in the hall at 2 a.m., whispering furiously into her phone in a clipped jargon that included terms like cold storage, private keys, hash rate, and consolidation UXO. I'm not a cryptocurrency expert, but I had spent 30 years as a bookkeeper for a manufacturing firm that used complex supply chain tracking, and I knew the shape of fraud. I knew what embezzlement language sounded like. It sounded like records being scrubbed. The first concrete piece fell into place during a household mishap, one of those moments where the universe drops a tool right into your hand. Tyler, attempting to impress a neighbor with his grilling skills, managed to cram not just corn husks but an entire paper towel and what looked like a wooden skewer down the garbage disposal until it seized completely. He and Chloe stood there uselessly prodding it with a spatula, arguing about who should call a plumber and whether the warranty covered stupidity. I came in from the patio, still wearing my apron from earlier when I'd been helping with dishes, and I assessed the situation. I simply opened the under-sink cabinet, unplugged the unit, grabbed the offset wrench that Frank had given me years ago for our kitchen, and manually turned the disposal's flywheel through the bottom socket until the jam released. I reached in with needle-nose pliers and extracted the wad of fibrous husks and shredded towel, reset the overload button and had it humming in under 4 minutes. Chloe stared at me. "I didn't know you could do that." I dried my hands on a towel and smiled meekly, the way a woman who is supposed to be helpless smiles. "Oh, I used to fix things with my dad. He was a locksmith, you pick up a few tricks." Her eyes narrowed just a fraction, something calculating flickering there, but she dismissed it as just a quirky old lady skill. Later that night I lay awake cataloging everything I'd noticed. Chloe's unexplained work travel to cities with cryptocurrency meetups, the boat purchased with what she claimed was a bonus from a brand collaboration, the way she flinched when I brought up the studio's bookkeeping over dinner. I decided to get inside her office. I was done waiting. 3 nights later, when they announced they were going to a dinner reservation at a steakhouse that required dressing up, I made my move. I had prepared. From the kitchen junk drawer I'd pocketed a sturdy paperclip and a thin metal tension wrench I'd fashioned from a windshield wiper blade insert I found in the garage, bending it with a pair of pliers into a basic hook. Chloe's office door had a standard quickset pin tumbler lock, the kind my father taught me to pick when I was 12. Sitting on a stool in his shop with practice cylinders and a blindfold, he believed a woman should know how to open any door she needed to. I knelt, felt for the keyway with my fingertip, inserted the tension wrench into the bottom, and applied the faintest rotational pressure, just enough to bind the pins. I used the rake pick in a gentle rocking motion, a technique for low-security locks that works by bouncing pins up and down until they catch at the shear line. Pin 1 clicked cleanly. Pin 2 resisted for a moment, then gave with a soft snick. 3 and 4 set almost simultaneously like dominoes. The plug turned, and the door swung open to a room that smelled of expensive candle wax and copier toner. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady, because this was muscle memory from 4 decades of fixing stubborn file cabinets and desk drawers in an office full of outdated locks. Her filing cabinet was locked too, but it was a cheap wafer lock that yielded in under 30 seconds with the same tension wrench and a half-diamond pick. Inside, the bottom drawer was packed with hanging folders labeled by bank name, tax year, and one thick folder marked T&T Financials in Chloe's loopy handwriting. That was T&T for Thread and Truth, our studio. I pulled it out and spread the contents on the carpet. The bank statements were printed monthly, and they told a damning story in stark black and white. For 15 months, Chloe had been siphoning money from the partnership operating account in irregular chunks. $2,600 here, $4,000 there, sometimes as much as $8,000, always on the same day large client payments cleared. Each withdrawal corresponded to a wire transfer to a digital currency exchange, one I recognized from internet searches. The memo lines read consulting fee or inventory advance or marketing retainer, but the receiving account numbers didn't match any textile supplier, yarn mill, or dye manufacturer we used. I recognized the exchange's corporate account prefix. She had routed funds through a shell of lies. The operating account, which was supposed to hold our working capital for undyed yarn, acid dyes, and shipping, was now drained to a few $100s. I'd been so busy with production backlogs and grieving Frank's sudden absence that I hadn't checked the daily balances in weeks. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might be sick. I pulled out my phone, which I had muted, and photographed every statement, every fraudulent memo, every withdrawal line, making sure the bank header and date were clearly visible. Behind the bank files, I found a single sheet of heavy bond paper in a folder labeled Partnership Legal. It was a forged addendum to our original partnership agreement, dated a month after Frank's death. My supposed signature sat at the bottom, a shakily traced approximation that looked like a child had tried to copy my cursive. It would fool no forensic examiner, but a busy bank teller processing a rush transfer might glance and stamp it. The addendum granted Chloe sole authority to manage all business banking, investment, and disposition of partnership assets. She had already been using it to convince the bank that the transfers were authorized. I photographed that too, my hand trembling just slightly as I realized the depth of her scheme. She wasn't just stealing, she was rewriting the legal truth to protect herself. Then, tucked into a plastic sleeve inside a folder labeled Personal Crypto, I found a piece of ordinary printer paper with a sequence of 24 random English words written in blue ink. Asterisk planet, carbon, stadium, fabric, ready, village, sister, custom, wage, open, lemon, diesel. Asterisk, I read them slowly, my breath catching. I recognized the format immediately from the late-night research I'd done on my burner phone. A BIP39 mnemonic seed phrase, the master key to a cryptocurrency wallet. Whoever held those words held everything inside. I photographed the page front and back, then carefully returned every document exactly as I'd found it, relocking the cabinet and the office door. I crept back to my guest room, my heart thudding against my breastbone. I had evidence of embezzlement, forgery, and the literal cryptographic key to the stolen funds. But I needed more than evidence. I needed to ensure that when the trap closed, Chloe couldn't just liquidate and run. Now I needed an ally with jurisdiction and the technical skill to freeze digital assets before they vanished into a tumbler or a privacy coin. I remembered an old colleague, Dennis Okonkwo, a forensic accountant I had worked with at the manufacturing firm 20 years earlier. He was brilliant, meticulous, and had since moved into a specialized unit at a major national bank that investigated crypto-related fraud. I called him the next morning from the backyard, huddled behind the garden shed, using a burner phone I'd purchased at a convenience store during one of my rare unsupervised outings when I'd claimed I needed to buy special tea for my nerves. I gave him the broad strokes, the seed phrase, the exchange transfers, the amounts. Dennis listened without interrupting, then said in that calm, methodical voice I remembered, "Margaret, if she's used a mixing service to obfuscate the trail, we'll need the hardware wallet itself to prove ownership and unlock the final destination, or at least the associated public address and exchange records that tie the seed to her identity. Can you find the physical device?" That's when I recalled the small USB-like gadget Chloe had plugged into her laptop during several late-night work sessions. It was about the size of a thumb drive, with a tiny screen and 2 buttons on the side, a Ledger hardware wallet. I told Dennis I'd find it. That search became a 2-day exercise in nerve and patience. I monitored Chloe's movements, noting when she left for yoga class and when Tyler took conference calls in the bedroom. I finally located the hardware wallet inside a shoebox in the back of her walk-in closet, nestled among old receipts, a tangled charging cable, and what looked like a forgotten passport. The shoebox was tucked behind a row of designer handbags, and I only found it by systematically moving every object on the top shelf while straining my ears for footsteps. I photographed the device's serial number through the clear plastic case that I carefully removed and replaced, leaving no trace. I also noted a sticker on the case with a long string of alphanumeric characters, likely a public key address or a reference code. I texted all of it to Dennis using an encrypted Securitext app he had me install. He came back 48 hours later with a bombshell that made me sit down hard on the guest bed. Not only had Chloe transferred the stolen funds into a wallet controlled by that ledger, she had also attempted to wash the coins through a well-known mixing service that split transactions into tiny fragments and recombined them. But she had made a rookie mistake, the kind of error that happens when arrogance outpaces knowledge. She'd sent a small test transaction first, a single transfer of 0.003 Bitcoin, directly from the exchange to the hardware wallet's public address before the mixers engaged. That test transaction, timestamped and irreversible on the blockchain's transparent ledger, created a forensic link. Dennis traced the flow from the exchange deposit address through a series of deterministic hops to the hardware wallet's generated addresses, and even the mixing couldn't break the connection definitively enough to resist a court-ordered exchange subpoena. The chain analysis mapped the full amount, totaling just over $108,000 at the time of theft, with some converted to Ethereum and some remaining in Bitcoin. We had her, but I didn't celebrate yet. I knew the timing of the strike had to be precise. The true masterstroke, the one that still moves me to tears when I think of Frank's quiet, methodical love, wasn't mine or Dennis's. It was Frank's. Through Dennis's network, I was put in contact with a trust attorney named Elaine Vasquez, a woman I had never met. Elaine revealed that Frank had come to her office 2 years before his death, right around the time Chloe had first started pressing for more control of the studio. He had created an irrevocable trust holding the barn studio property, all its equipment, and the business's intellectual property including our dye formulas and brand name Thread and Truth. The trust document contained a specific dead man switch clause that Elaine read to me over the phone, her voice grave. If Chloe ever attempted to transfer ownership of the business or its assets without Margaret's explicit, notarized, in-person consent, or if she was found by a court or regulatory body to have committed financial fraud against the partnership or its partners, the entire trust corpus would automatically revert to Margaret as sole trustee, and any attempted transfer of business assets would be declared void ab initio, void from the beginning. Frank had built a legal cage around Chloe's greed without ever confronting her directly, because he knew his daughter would twist any open conflict into victimhood. He had studied the stress points in the family structure and reinforced them with contract language. Elaine confirmed that a copy of the trust, along with a detailed letter from Frank explaining his fears and his love for me, had been held in escrow with the firm's vault. She had already filed a notice with the bank where the business account was held, pointing out the suspicious signature and triggering an internal compliance hold on all outgoing wires. The bank compliance officer, a woman named Patricia who specialized in elder financial abuse and fiduciary fraud, contacted me through Elaine and began her own investigation. The noose was being woven from multiple threads, and Chloe had no idea. But I needed one final piece to ensure that Chloe and Tyler would face the fullest legal and social consequences, and because I needed to know, truly know, that there was no scrap of humanity left to mourn. I had tried for years to love Chloe, to see her as Frank's lonely little girl, but I needed to strip away any remaining self-deception. I staged a medical scare, a calculated, cold-blooded test that I thought about for 2 nights before executing. I had read about this in a true crime memoir, the fake collapse to reveal a person's true character under pressure. One afternoon, when Chloe was prepping vegetables for dinner and Tyler was in the living room watching a game, I stood near the kitchen island, clutching the counter, and I let my body go slack. I made my eyes roll back, gasped, and crumpled to the tile floor in what looked exactly like a cardiac episode, the kind that had killed Frank. I lay motionless except for shallow, irregular breaths, my eyes slightly open but unseeing, my limbs splayed at wrong angles. I had the burner phone recording audio in my apron pocket. What happened next still makes my throat tighten when I recall it. Chloe stared at me for a full 3 seconds, her knife frozen mid-sharp. Her eyes didn't widen with concern, they darted to the hallway that led to the master bedroom, then back to my body. Then she said flatly, "Tyler, the cash box." Now. He appeared, stepping over my legs without a downward glance, his sneakers squeaking on the tile as he followed her. They both rushed to the bedroom, and I heard drawers yanked open, their voices muffled but urgent. Then the distinctive beep of her laptop booting up, the sound of the ledger being unplugged and reconnected. Only after nearly 2 full minutes did I hear Chloe's voice, now pitched with theatrical panic, calling 911. She returned to the kitchen and knelt beside me, but I could feel her hand trembling not with worry, but with the adrenaline of securing whatever financial evidence she thought needed to be hidden or moved to a new cold storage. The paramedics arrived and checked my vitals. I made a miraculous recovery, blaming low blood sugar and lack of sleep, waving off their concern. That night, after everyone was asleep, I listened to the audio recording through earbuds, and the coldness of her voice, the complete absence of care, confirmed what I already suspected. The person I had tried to love for Frank's sake was a hollow shell. The cruelty beat was complete, and it hardened my resolve to see this through without mercy. The confrontation came 3 days later, though I didn't plan it to happen exactly at the house. The mechanism needed to be triggered at the bank, where the compliance hold had frozen the business accounts, and Chloe, desperate, would be forced to bring me in to unfreeze them. Patricia, the compliance officer, called me on my burner and said that Chloe had been receiving increasingly frantic calls from the exchange, which had frozen her account pending verification of the source of funds. Chloe, realizing the bank had placed a hold on the partnership account as well, concocted a story about needing to restructure with a new signature card. She told me that morning, her voice brittle and fake cheerful, that we needed to go to the bank to sign some routine papers so the business could continue paying vendors. I agreed, wearing my best bewildered widow expression. In the car, Tyler drove, Chloe in the passenger seat peppering me with questions about whether I had any concerns, trying to gauge if I suspected. I answered vaguely, saying I just wanted the whole business mess to be over so I could grieve in peace. The bank branch was a glass and marble lobby with tellers who recognized me. Chloe had arranged a meeting with a personal banker in a small glass-walled office. She spread documents on the table, a full partnership dissolution, a transfer of trust assets and a release of all claims, all worded to strip me of ownership and sign away any future liability against her. She pushed a pen toward me. "Margaret, you just sign these 3 lines and I'll handle everything. The bank needs your signature to release the hold so we can pay the suppliers. It's just a formality. Frank would want the studio to survive." I looked at her, this woman who had spent a year bleeding me dry, who had forged my name, who had stepped over my apparently dying body to grab her crypto keys. I set the pen down. I stood up straight, all 5'4" of me, and for the first time I let the mask of fog and grief drop completely. My voice was calm, clear, the voice of a woman who has stared at ledgers for 4 decades and never once missed a discrepancy. "No, I won't sign away what Frank built to protect me. And you're about to understand exactly what a forensic audit looks like." Her face went pale, the color draining from her lips as she heard the word, forensic. At that exact moment, a side door to the banking office opened, and in walked Dennis Okonkwo in a crisp suit, flanked by 2 men in plain clothes who identified themselves as special agents with the local FBI cybercrime task force. They had a warrant to seize all digital devices from Chloe and Tyler, including the phones in their pockets and any hardware wallets in their possession. A uniformed officer who had been waiting in the lobby stepped forward. Chloe shrieked, "You can't do this, this is my mother," but the word hung in the air like a lie. Tyler started in about lawyers and unreasonable search, but Dennis simply handed the lead agent a printed chain analysis report and the photograph of the forged signature. They had already recovered the ledger from Tyler's jacket, where he'd hidden it before we left the house, a foolish move that placed the device directly in his possession. Chloe locked eyes with me, and I saw the precise moment she understood that I had outplayed her for months. She called me a very ugly word, a word I won't repeat here. I didn't flinch. I simply picked up my purse, walked out of the office and stood in the lobby while the agents read them their rights. The aftermath was methodical, layered, and deeply satisfying in a way that felt more like restoration than revenge. Chloe and Tyler were arrested that afternoon. Her phone, laptop, and the ledger were taken into evidence. The federal charging document included wire fraud, money laundering, and aggravated identity theft for forging my signature on the partnership addendum. Dennis's forensic report became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case, a meticulously footnoted map of every transaction. The timestamps matching her phone location data, the seed phrase recovered and matched to the hardware wallet's deterministic address tree. The wallet unlocked under court order to reveal that approximately $72,000 in mixed cryptocurrency remained frozen before she could transfer it to an unreachable offshore service. Chloe's defense attorney tried to argue that she was just a confused entrepreneur, but the cold recording from my apron pocket was played in a pretrial hearing, and her voice saying "the cash box," while I lay on the floor silenced every protest. She pleaded out to avoid a longer sentence, accepting 2 years in federal prison with restitution for the full $115,000, plus interest and investigation costs. Tyler got 18 months for conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Their assets were seized: the BMW, the boat, the suburban house, which they had refinanced with a fraudulent lien. The forfeiture proceeds went toward restitution, but Chloe couldn't cover even a fraction without her crypto, and the feds now held that in a monitored wallet, awaiting distribution to me as the victim. So the court approved a creative community restitution plan that I proposed during her sentencing hearing. I argued that true accountability required her to face the community she had defrauded, to labor in the very shop she tried to steal. The judge, a keen knitter herself I later learned, assigned Chloe 300 hours of supervised community service to be performed at my new business, convertible to further financial penalties if she failed. I renamed the studio Purl of Perjury. I had the barn repainted a crisp slate blue with white trim, and I installed a glass-walled retail space at the front where customers can watch the winding. Using the reclaimed trust assets and a small reward from Patricia's bank for assisting in the fraud detection, I restocked the dye vats with new immersion circulators, ordered a pallet of undyed superwash merino from a farm in Montana, and hired 2 young dyers from the local textile guild. But the centerpiece of the shop's ethos became Chloe's penance. Every Tuesday through Saturday, she stands at a wooden winding table in that retail space, hand-winding skeins of our signature, absolute integrity, fingering weight, a colorway I formulated in a deep, honest indigo with specks of cochineal pink like a ledger's red ink. She wears a canvas apron I designed, with bold maroon letters ironed onto the chest. Asterisk tangled in crypto lies asterisk. The letters are permanent, fabric painted and heat set, the kind of unignorable branding that she used to chase on Instagram. Customers tiptoe in and snap photos. Some ask her what she did, and per the terms of her community service agreement, she has to look them in the eye and explain that she stole her stepmother's inheritance, that she forged legal documents, that she attempted to leave me destitute. I require it because shame is a transaction, and she owes a debt she can never fully pay. The federal fraud docket number 223CR00184 appears on every single yarn label, printed above the fiber content and care instructions. Below it in small type a line reads, "This skein was dyed with transparency, a standard the founding partner failed to uphold." Customers tell me they frame the labels as a reminder. We ship hundreds of skeins a month now, and the story spreads with every package. I reclaimed everything Frank had quietly, brilliantly secured for me. He had once told me while sketching a new roof truss design late at night, "A good blueprint accounts for the stress points before the storm hits. You design for the worst load, not the average day." He saw his daughter's deep flaws, and instead of ignoring them, he built a structure that would withstand them. I still miss him. Every single morning when I walk into the barn and smell the wet wool and vinegar from the dye pots, when I hear the rhythm of the swift spinning, I think of his pencil on paper. But I no longer feel helpless. I spend my mornings formulating new colorways with the precision of a chemist, my afternoons manipulating pH and temperature like a sorceress, and my evenings doing the bookkeeping with a coffee mug in hand, every transaction balanced, every wire accounted for. Sometimes I watch Chloe winding skeins through the glass, her fingers moving with a mechanical rhythm she's learned, her face a study in contained resentment, and I feel a pang of something complex. Not pity, not satisfaction exactly, but a quiet recognition that justice, like a well-dyed skein, takes time, heat, and the right mordant to set permanently. The color won't bleed now. The fiber has been fixed. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. If you believe in standing up for yourself against all odds, hit that like button and subscribe. We'll be back with another story of hidden truths and hard-won wisdom soon. Until then, take care of your stitches.